Hmm. Okay, so welcome everyone to this episode of All About Soul. I have a guest with me today, Julie Ryan, who is a psychic medium, a medical intuitive, also a businesswoman, inventor, entrepreneur, podcaster, and author. So, Julie truly walks between the worlds, and I guess we'll talk a little bit about that today. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you.
So, the first thing that came up for me as I was connecting with you really was to ask, well, how do you juggle the buffet of psychicness that you are and the businesswoman in you? And I mean, even as I look at you, right, and as we connect, I can feel you have grounding, stability, structure, and yet all those conversations with angels and psychic readings and so on. How, first of all, how did it start for you? How did you, what came first, business or psychicness?
Well, business by far. I did not have dead people chasing me as a child, or if I did, I wouldn't have known what to do with that, Inga. Well, yeah, that would have been a little scary. So, no, I learned how to do all this. I tell everybody I'm a businesswoman and an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world who learned how to do woo woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness. So that means that once we connect with spirit, we can do it all. You can we can talk to your dead grandma. I can look inside your body and help facilitate energetic healings. We can talk to your cat. I can scan your cat. We can do past life stuff, talk to your angels, your spirit guides. Tell how close to death somebody is. Communicate with any spirit, whether it's attached to a body or not, is irrelevant. So that's what I found when I first started studying all of this about a little more than 30 years ago now. Would you like for me to share how that all came about?
Yes, yes, please. Yes.
A girlfriend gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mays, and
Uh-huh.
she called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, well, what the heck is that? I'd never heard that word before, that term before. And at that point, Inga, I had been in the hospital supply industry for about 10 years, had invented surgical devices, was manufacturing them. So I was interested in helping people heal, but through the traditional methods, through hospitals and doctors and medical providers. And so when I heard the term medical intuitive, I wanted to know more. And back then, we didn't have the internet yet. So I went to a bookstore and I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan, who was a former NASA physicist. She was a rocket scientist, truly. And she parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable languaging in using energy to help people heal. And I wanted to know more. So I called her school and I said, do you have anybody in this area teaching this stuff? And lo and behold, they did. They had a graduate of her school who had also studied other modalities. So she kind of put it all together in her own formula. And I studied with her for 6 years. So I did energy healing for 3 years, Kabbalistic healing, things like that. And then fast forward 30 years, and I have my own goulash, of all my experiences. And now I teach people all over the world how to do the buffet of psychicness in a weekend. What took me a long time to learn. And I equate that, Inga, to we used to communicate via carrier pigeon. And then we used the Pony Express. And then we went to mail. And now we communicate instantly. And so in the 50 years since Barbara Brennan wrote her book, things obviously have become more easily accessible. And frankly, the whole spiritual side of the equation, I think, is becoming more of the zeitgeist outside of traditional religions and cultures as we know them. I'm finding that people are interested in that stuff, but they want to know how they can have a conversation and a relationship with spirit as well.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I do agree with you that it speeds up, right? I remember when I was studying Reiki, and that was 10 years ago, and my teacher was saying, well, when it first came, it was extremely rare, extremely uncommon for people to feel something, right? You just acted in faith. It's there. And so you were now, and that was 10 years ago, almost everyone feels something. You feel the heat in the hands. I remember immediately I discovered a gift that when I scanned the body with my hands, I could feel where there is an energetic block or a physical ailment. And it was a
Right.
slightly different sensation in the hands. And
Yeah.
it was such a shock to me. I was like, oh, it's really happening.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I take it a step further, and it's like I'm a human MRI. I can see inside people's bodies energetically. So I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, metastasized cancer, things like that, and then help facilitate energetic healings for whatever the issue is. Bottom line, nobody ever heals anybody else, ever. No doctor, no medical provider, no healer like you or like me. We all heal ourselves. And so the work that I do, the work that you do, I believe, is part of the whole healing equation. And we bring in Eastern and Western medicine and complementary medicine like chiropractic and uh, herbalism or homeopathy or whatever, and we create our own formula to help us heal.
So, what would be I guess my question is, what's your method, right? Maybe it's a very it's a very broad question, but what's your method? And I'm even curious, like on a personal level. So how do you scan for energy misalignments and physical issues, and like how do you teach that to people as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like when I get somebody on my radar, I call it on my radar, I raise my vibrational level to the level of spirit because we're all spirits attached to a body having a human experience. Most of us have heard that a lot. And when we're attached to a body, our spirit vibrates more slowly simply because the body has mass. So I raise my vibrational level, takes a nanosecond. I'm going to watch a laser beam in my mind's eye come from my body, wherever I am, and hook into the person's body, wherever they are. I could find you if you were in a galaxy far, far away. I can find you anywhere. Same thing with animals. I just think of them and where they are, and then I connect into them. And then I envision Inga shooting energy from my feet up through, from their feet rather, up through the top of their head. And it's as if I'm looking at an x ray or a CT scan or an MRI. I always go in blind first because I want to see where the energy is going to go. It's always going to I illuminate the most pressing issue first. And then I'll have, if I'm working with a client for an hour, I'll have a list of what their symptoms are. And so something will be identified, there'll be healing. Something else will be identified, there'll be healing. It goes very fast. The healings take the place of, or take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures in my mind's eye that emulate what I saw in surgery for all those years when I was developing products, testing prototypes, things like that. Sometimes I see healings that utilize methodologies and devices that haven't been invented yet. And you'll hear me say, oh, that's cool. I haven't seen that before. and, and then it's just part of my repertoire. And inevitably, somebody else will come along with a similar symptom. So it's obviously developed over 30 years. I have literally scanned tens of thousands of people. I probably scan about 3,000 people a year on average between my call-in show, which is Thursday nights at 8 Eastern, and people call in from all over the world. And we can do anything from the buffet of psychicness. And it's really fun because I tell my listeners, or I ask my listeners to envision what I'm describing, because then we're all sending a healing to the person who's requesting it. It's really
Mm.
quite remarkable.
So working also with the group field. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does sound remarkable. I love that. Yeah. And I was, as you were talking, I was kind of seeing or sensing those, procedures coming in for you that hadn't been invented yet.
It's so
I
much
love
fun
that.
because it appeals to my inventor brain. And it's never boring because it's spirit working through me and with me, like spirit working through you and with you. And and it's always interesting because certainly people will present with some similar symptoms oftentimes, and I'll know what the healing's gonna be, or I'll think I'll know what the healing's gonna be, and then there'll be some individualized nuance that spirit will throw into the equation. And so I believe that I'm holding the energy. I'm like the conduit between spirit and the person. And it, I'm not a Bible thumper, but in the Bible it says wherever two or more are gathered in my name,
Yeah.
miracles can occur. And that's what I think's going on. I think it's the person with whom I'm working and me and spirit. So two or more gathered in my name. And I've seen really miraculous things happen. New organs get generated with stem cell energy that show up on subsequent scans at the doctor's office or the hospital, and it freaks out the doctors. That's really fun when that happens. I've had several doctors call me over the years, Inga, and say, "What are you doing? And how does this stuff work?" And so that's interesting. I also always tell my clients and tell the people that are calling into my show, the healing has happened on the energetic level. Now it's going to integrate into their body. And
Uh-huh.
that can happen instantly. It can take days, weeks, months, may need complementary care like change in diet, physical therapy, surgery, whatever. But it's always our spirit's prerogative to utilize the healing in a way that best facilitates whatever it is their spirit's exploring in this lifetime. So I'm all about combining spirituality and practicality.
Yeah.
So as I'm working with somebody, I'm getting information into my head. I call those divine downloads. And I'm watching the healing, I'm describing it to them, we're chit chatting. I always say it's a good thing I'm a girl because I can multitask. And so I'm saying, okay, here this healing's happen, and here's what you can do on the human level,
Hmm.
you know, do do these kinds of changes, stay away from dairy or,
Hmm.
whatever, get sunlight, take vitamin D. I'm getting that information downloaded into my head simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, um, kind of one question that I haven't formulated yet in my head. Uh, Part of it is, did you get obstructed or blocked, I mean, by the, let's say, by the establishment, or were people simply terrified or ridiculed, like what was kind of, how do you navigate the, because some people say, oh, nobody understands me, and some are perfectly comfortable swimming in both seas at the same time. What was your experience with that? Like suddenly you go into miraculous healings, and how does the establishment react?
Well, a couple of stories on that, if I may. First of all, it's rare that somebody comes to me and says, "Well, you got to prove this to me." And
Mm,
I don't. What do you want to talk about? The weather, politics, sports? I'm happy to talk to you about whatever. And then normally they'll say, "No, no, I'm interested." And I'll say, "Okay, do you pray?" And they'll say, "Of course I pray." And I'll be a little indignant. And I'll say, "Great. To whom are you praying?" Let's just say they say Jesus. I say, "Great. Are your prayers ever answered?" And they'll say, "Yeah, all the time." I say, "Okay. So if I'm getting this right, you're sitting on the couch in your home and you're talking to Jesus in prayer. Is Jesus sitting next to you on the couch and you can hold his hand while you're talking to him?" And they'll say, "No, of course not." And I'll say, "Oh, you're talking with Jesus' spirit." And you
mm,
can just see their eyes just get big, and their synapses in their brain start to fire, and they say, "Well, I never thought of it that way." I said, "We're all talking to spirits all day long. We just don't realize it." you're doing it too. And then that negates that. The other thing, I have a fun story about how my book, Angelic Attendants, came about. This is going to switch topics for a moment. It's about what happens as we transition from this life into the next and how we're surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. Which, by the way, university based research says 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as they're dying.
Oh,
90%,
really?
Inga.
Okay.
So we thought in the past, oh, grandma's just hallucinating. It must be the
Hmm.
morphine that
Hmm.
hospice is giving her when she's talking to her deceased mother, who's been dead for 40 years. And in actuality, your grandmother is actually seeing her mother and can communicate with her spirit. So one day, well, let me back up. My mother, first time I saw what I call the 12 phases of transition, how we're surrounded by angels and loved ones, was in 2002 when my own mother was dying. And we can talk about that in a minute. And so a few years later, I was having a healing done on me by my mentor. And when a healing's being done on me, Inga, my deceased loved one's spirits line both sides of the table that I'm laying on. Even my little dog Katie is on her hind legs and her little paws. Katie's spirit is up, up on the table. So one day, this spirit of this dead Pope shows up. And I said, he's got his Pope hat on and his shepherd's rod and the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, who are you? And my mentor, Susan, could see him too. And he said, well, I'm Clement.
Uh-huh.
I said, great. I went through 12 years of Catholic schools. I never heard of a Pope Clement. And he laughed and he said, well, I was number six. I said, okay, great. How may I help you? And he said, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. Because you know what happens. It's been so bastardized over the millennia. People are so afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's glorious on the spirit side. And you need to teach people that. And I said, oh, thank you so much for your vote of confidence. But you see, I'm a businesswoman. And if I do that, people will think I'm nuts. And he said, and he
Yes.
laughed. And he said, yeah, 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 yeah. Everything you've done in your life. And I've founded 9 companies in 5 industries. And he said, everything you've done in your life is, has been to prepare you for this. Again, I said, thank you so much for stopping by, but I'm really not interested because I'm thinking this is going to ruin my businesses if I come out like as this crazy woman talking about angels and spirits and stuff. So I go in my car to go home a few minutes later, Inga, and I looked him up on my phone. Come to find out, this guy was in office during the Black Plague when 2/3 of Europe died, and he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, good Lord, I can't make that up. And so I thought, all right, all right, all right. So a few years go by, and I'm sitting in church between my husband and my son, and the priest during his sermon is saying, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could tell us if angels and our loved ones really greet us and lead us into heaven, into paradise?
Mhm.
And I'm getting elbowed from both sides. My husband and my son are elbowing me. And I'm thinking, really, God, from the pulpit, you're giving me grief about this. Seriously? So I wrote angelic attendance, and and then while I was writing it, I was led to research this prayer called In Paradisum that said at
Mhm.
the end of every Catholic funeral, and it talks about your angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. Because in Latin, In Paradisum is into
Mhm.
paradise.
Mhm.
And what I learned was it originated as a 5th century Gregorian chant. And I thought, well, maybe it took till the 5th century till somebody was well educated enough that they could read and write. And those were men living in monasteries and synagogues. Those were the monks who were the scribes. So I thought, I bet people have been able to see this since the beginning of time. So I went ahead and I wrote the book. And I thought, all right, I got to put up a website. So askjulieryan.com goes up. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to get nailed. Somebody, it's going to affect my businesses somehow. But all right, I'll do it. So askjulieryan.com goes up. I'm lecturing a few weeks later at a big conference, mostly C-suite executives, mostly men. And at the end of my talk, my business talk, Inga, this man comes up to me with his iPad open. And he
Mhm.
says, to askjulieryan.com. And he says, is this you? And I'm thinking, yeah, that's my picture. And he said, uh, I want to know more about this. Can we sit together at lunch? And I'm thinking,
Wow.
oh, here we go. I'm just going to get blasted, for an hour. And so I sat at a table, Ingo, with 8 seats, 7 men, and me. All they wanted to talk about was woo woo. No business stuff, not about my talk, not about the conference, not about their companies. They wanted to talk about woo woo. And woo, by the way, in Taoism means source. I don't know if
Yes,
you knew
yes.
that. Yeah. Most
Yeah.
people don't know
My
that.
sister told me
And so I thought, okay, okay, I'm in. I'm in full guns. And I've never looked back. Sold a couple of companies and now I do this full time.
that.
So
Wow.
long answer to your
Mhm.
question, but
Mhm.
it really was a situation where I was led and then I was given signs and validation by spirit the whole time. It took several years for me to have the golden ovary courage to come out of the closet because guys have breast balls and girls have golden ovaries. Did you know that? Yeah. So so I thought, all right, so here we are. And it's rare. I can't even think of the last time somebody gave me a hard time about any of this. And my eighth book will be released in about a month. So, I mean, I am in full guns, full force with this
Mm.
buffet of psychicness stuff.
Amazing. I love this. So since we started talking about this, actually, let me go into the woo-woo stuff.
Yeah.
So, what happens when people die, right? I agree with you. It's a fascinating subject, and at the same time there is almost like, oh no, I don't want to hear something simple or overly simple, right? Or what if it's this and what if it's that?
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are so many traditions, right? I know in the Buddhist tradition, there is like this whole body of works to pray for the soul, to help the soul transcend all those intermediary realms and not get confused and not go here or there. So, um, and there is a book, right, where that you shown,
Book of
yeah,
the Dead.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so could you guide us? Could you give us a little overview?
Sure. You're absolutely right. Every culture, every religion has a ceremony or a tradition that they do when somebody dies. And it's been my experience in the past probably 100 years that dying has, especially in America, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think Europe's as far gone as America with this stuff, where people die in hospitals or nursing homes or hospice cares. People don't die in their homes very often anymore, especially in America. I think more do in Europe and other parts of the world. People are afraid of it. And that was why I wrote Angelic Attendants, because there's lots of information out there, Inga, about the afterlife and about grieving and about near-death experiences and that kind of thing, but really not much out there about what's happening as somebody's dying. And when we're with a loved one who's dying, we're afraid for them because we don't know. And we've watched the movies, is the angel of death going to come get them? My parish priest said from the altar during a sermon, and I told him I was going to poach this. He said, when we die, we don't know if we're going to fly or we're going to fry. And I thought that was great. So I said, I'm gonna poach that and use it. He goes, yeah, go ahead. So I think we've been so inundated with the fear of burning for eternity, and that comes from cultures and religions that are just exerting control over the masses with fear. We saw that with the whole pandemic thing in the last 5 years. So, what happens is our spirits start to separate from our bodies and they come out the top of the head. And it looks like a bubble that you'd see in a cartoon or an illustration where it's the character's thoughts or what their words are that they're speaking. I call that the
Mm-hmm.
spirit bubble. And then the first spirit to show up is the maternal spirit, Inga. So whoever the woman was that raised the person who's dying, if it was their birth mother or an adopted mother or perhaps a grandmother, whoever the woman was that raised that person is the first spirit to show up. And she runs the show from the spirit world. That really surprised me because I thought God certainly has a department, like a death department in heaven. And they find out, okay, Susie May's dying, so send angels out to help Susie May transition. And that's not what happens. It's the mother spirit that's running the show, calling in the other spirits and the angels and the pets and all of that. So mother spirit shows up. Paternal spirit is next. My dad's gone. My dad's in heaven. So if he was still alive, it would be my maternal grandfather. It's always on the maternal line still. And then what happens is angels come in, and these are big old angels. I was taught as a Catholic schoolgirl, here's what angels look like: big wings, white robe, belt, made out of rope, bare feet. Is that what angels really look like? Well, that's how I was taught they look, like the statues and the artwork. Somebody growing up in an indigenous culture in the middle of the Amazon may see angel energy as just like a ball of purple fog. Spirit's always going to show up in a way that we're going to be able to recognize who they are. So it's always going to be based on our own frame of reference. And then let's say, for conversation's sake, that our dying person is laying in a bed, face up. So the parent spirits anchor at the foot, and the angels and the parents form a circle around that dying person. As the person's getting closer to death, that circle opens into a horseshoe and then eventually a straight line across the foot of the bed. Important note, since time doesn't exist in the spirit world, time's a human creation. Everybody goes through what I call the 12 phases of transition, regardless of how they pass, whether it's instantly in the case of a homicide or suicide, or whether it's over a prolonged period of time, days, weeks, months, even years. Everybody goes through the 12 phases of transition. I've seen it thousands of times. Spirits told me hundreds of times, yes, everybody goes through the 12 phases. So, spirit circle opens up with the angels. Other deceased loved ones' spirits show up from all the person's lifetimes, Inga, and they're in period dress. So we may have caveman dressed people, and we may have Renaissance dressed people, and 1960s go-go boots and miniskirts dressed people, and deceased loved ones. And we can describe what there's a woman there with white hair and her hair's in a bun, and she's wearing a sweater that buttons up the front and has pearl buttons. And they go, well, that's Grandma Mary. I mean, they know instantly, the family. And then the spirits of deceased pets and animals show up. And they're pets that the person's had throughout their life. If somebody's grown up on a farm, it can be cows and horses and lammies and chicks and ducks and pigs and, whatever, goats. And I'll say, did your mom grow up on a farm, or does she live on a farm now? They'll say, yeah, how'd you know? I said, well, there's all these farm animals there. And when I describe them, they'll know what their names are. So that's interesting. A couple of other interesting things to note. Number one, at about phase 9, no, about phase 6-ish, 5, 6, there are two additional angels that show up. And they're on either side of the spirit bubble,
Mhm.
attached to the top of the person's head. Around phase 9, between phase 9 and 10, their wings start to move. And it reminded me, when I saw this the first time with my mother, of a giant owl's wings, slow, silent, rhythmic. And I could almost feel like an upward pull. And it reminded me of being in a car wash at the end when they turn the dryer on to suck all the water off your car. That's what it reminded me of when my mom was dying. And I didn't know what those angels were there for, but I knew that they were going to play a role. As their wings moved, Inga, they created a vortex. And the vortex had that upward suction in it. So, in fact, my mom's spirit went through that vortex, and we hear that a lot from near-death experiencers. They'll go through a tunnel or a vortex, and they'll see the light, or they'll see deceased loved ones or a religious figure
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
That's the vortex they're talking about. So these angels' wings form this. And so when I was writing angelic attendants, I thought, hmm, wonder wonder if I can find something about owl. So here's what I put into the search bar: owl wings vortex.
Yeah.
What I learned was there's this aeronautical engineering phenomenon called the wingtip vortex. And it's how the air goes over and under a wing and causes a vortex to form, which causes lift. Every jet, every plane, every bug, every bird, every kite, anything that flies has a wingtip vortex underneath it causing lift. If you Google that, there are tens of thousands of drawings and articles and papers and jazz on the wingtip vortex. Every pilot knows about the wingtip vortex. And I thought, oh my heavens, this is a phenomenon that the angel's wings movement causes in our human world. I can see it, I can hear it, I can feel it, causes this upward pull, helps the spirit separate from the body. And then those angels on either side of the spirit bubble escort the spirit to heaven, which looks like this big yellowish whitish plasma wall to me. And oh, by the way, I've never seen St. Peter out front with a clipboard in his hand going, yeah, you're allowed in. No, you got to go burn for eternity because everybody goes to heaven. So that's basically an overview of what happens in the 12 phases of transition. Anybody that wants a free copy of my book, just go to askjulieryangift.com and we'll send you a free digital and audiobook download. So, I think, and we've got it in Spanish too. I think everybody needs to know what's going to happen. And I think this stuff should be taught in the schools. Many churches and synagogues give my book to families, and many, many hospice organizations do as well. And it just provides lots of comfort and clarity to people going through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So angelic attendants, and I'll post a link as well under the description so people can look if they're interested. And, as you were talking, I was thinking of something as a kind of a devolution of consciousness in terms of afterlife. Think of our ancestral traditions, right? Like, for example, I was born in Latvia. So we have a very old Baltic tradition, which is, more than 10,000 years old. And the concept of hell per se, it did not exist as a place of punishment. There was an ancestral realm where the roots of the tree, kind of that lower world, where you can meet angry ancestors or bad ancestors or ancestors who can torture you, and what kinds of, all kinds of things can happen. And then the soul goes straight to God. So there was like a tree, right? So we are like a tree ourselves. So there is that lower part goes down to the spirit world, soul goes up. But it's almost like um, it's like those lower realms, those ancestral realms, they became darker and darker and darker and eventually turned into hell because we got more and more and more separate from reality, I guess, or from the oneness.
I think it was religions and cultures and civilizations that were using fear to control the masses. Like, you better do what I say. You better pay us, a certain percentage of your income. You better tithe. You better do whatever, or you're going to go burn in hell. And back then, people were illiterate. People were only were able to read and write. That's been in the past 150 years or so. He's in his mid 70s, and his grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, probably maybe around the turn of the century, she couldn't read or write here in America, and that wasn't that long ago. So I think that people were way more influenced by people who were their leadership, whether that be in a religion or in a government, and certainly throughout a whole lot of humanity, it was one and the same. And
Yeah.
and people just followed because they didn't have any other way to, to validate things. They didn't have the capability to read something or read somebody else's opinion, and they just did what they felt, their leaders who were saying that they were messengers from God, so you need to do this or you're going to burn it in hell. I think it's interesting too that in the Bible, Hades, which is the original word for hell before it was translated, was a place in the desert where all the lepers went. It was a leper colony. So if somebody was banished to Hades, that meant they were going to go burn in the middle of the desert, and they would be tortured like the lepers were tortured because of their illness. And it's interesting to me how through all of the translations and iterations of the different Bibles and texts, that things have gotten changed. And for heaven's sakes, people have been analyzing that stuff for millennia, and they still are.
Yeah.
So I think it all comes in. That's interesting though about that tradition from Latvia. I'm fascinated with the different traditions, the Nordic traditions, the Asian traditions, the native indigenous cultures, traditions. They all have them.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I started rediscovering my ancestry only recently because it's kind of, when um and it came in like those old traditions and what they spoke of the afterlife. And I thought, well, we kind of dropped in consciousness, at least in that respect.
Well, and I think you got to remember too that it's all metaphors. They're all
Yes.
analogies to give us a human frame of reference based on where we are in our human evolution from a life experience and an intellect and what we've been exposed to. So when I'm working with people in healings, I get hilarious analogies from spirit. I may tell somebody their elbow looks like a bowl of whipped cream or something crazy. And it's to give us that human frame of reference for something that we don't understand. And there's really no other way to illustrate it. And when I think about it, we're not watching in the traditional healing methodologies. We're not watching when a cut is healing, one cell attaching to the next cell, to the next cell, to the next cell that's forming the epidermis and then the dermis and all of that. We just know it works. Furthermore, anesthesia, whenever anybody has surgery and they have anesthesia, they don't know how anesthesia works.
Mhm.
You ask the anesthesiologist, you say, how does this really work? They'll say, we don't really know. It just works. But how many surgeries are performed with general anesthesia around the world every day? So we don't know how that works either. And I think it puts it into perspective that there are a lot of things we don't know how they work, but we see the outcome.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And putting words onto things, that's another thing that kind of I feel the further I go, and I love your eloquence and that you do put words. You do make things tangible because sometimes I notice that kind of the more you open up to spirit and the more I see it becomes very difficult to almost like I would sit on the fence, right? Well, this is right and this is right, but the results, I agree, you measure it by the results. Because to make those proclamations like, oh, it's this way and no other way, I can't do that anymore. I could do that 20 years ago, but it's over.
Right. Absolutely. And there's no right or wrong or good or bad in the spirit world. I've heard that billions of times from spirit. They say it's just an experience. And and that comes into play in the 12 phases of transition. Somebody will say, well, if my dad's in phase 9, how much time does he have left? And I'll say, it's all subjective. And we're all in control of when we leave, how we leave, who's with us or not when we leave, and what the circumstances are that surround our passing. We all decide that. Our spirit decides that. Furthermore, with medical stuff, it's the exact same thing. So it's all predicated on what that person's spirit wants to explore. I have people that have things happen instantly in a healing. I have other people that it takes a long time and it involves surgery and maybe physical therapy and change in diet and other modalities too for them to heal. But it's all based on what that person's spirit wants to explore. When somebody's contacting us, contacting me or one of my graduates, I have a bunch of graduates that work with me and do client appointments too, and they have a loved one who's dying. I'll tell them to go to my website, askjulieryan.com, download the 12 Phases of Transition chart. It's illustrated. Save it on your phone. It's a free download. Go to the 12 Phases tab. It's a free download. And then when your loved one is in the dying process, just ask either aloud or in your head, what phase is my husband in? What phase is whoever in? And you'll hear a number in your head. And then you can refer to the chart. And as you see your loved one going through, let's say, phase 6, 7, 8 in rapid succession, then you want to be calling in the family. Because sometimes people travel vast distances, long distances. Certainly, they take time off work. They're having to make arrangements sometimes for childcare and other pet care and things like that. And oftentimes people want to be with their loved one at the end of their life. So we find that it's very, very helpful. Just download it on your phone and just ask, and you'll hear a number in your head.
Mm. And and people have reported that it works, basically, that you
Works
can kind
great.
of estimate.
Works great. If you go on Amazon and you look up angelic attendants, I think there was over 600 um, comments on there, and they're so heartwarming, Inga, about, oh my
Mm.
gosh, I never would have been able to get through this without knowing what my mom was going through. I never would have been able to really delve into my grief because
Mm.
my dad died in a hospital during COVID and I wasn't able to be with him. Nobody was allowed in the hospital. So many people suffered with not being able to be with their
Yeah,
loved ones at the end of
yeah.
life during that pandemic period. Or somebody who has a loved one who's in the military and they die, or in a car accident by themselves, or somebody dies instantly or dies in their sleep. And we think, oh, they were alone. No, they weren't. Everybody's always surrounded by angels and the spirits of
Mm.
deceased loved ones and pets. Everybody. So nobody ever dies alone, ever, 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 ever. Suicide. A lot of people who die by suicide, I'll talk to their family members, and they're just agonizing over the thought that their loved one was alone and took their life. And yeah, the angels were around them too. And so were all of their deceased loved ones. And by the way, when I talk to those spirits of people who died by suicide, I would say I can't think of a time when they didn't tell me this. Pretty much all of them with whom I've talked to, and it's thousands of them over the years, will say, it was great. It was instant. I was ready to go. My spirit was separated from my body. It was wonderful. I'm sorry for the pain that it's caused my family, but it was instant. It was the best way that I could think of to go back to heaven. I was done with what I wanted to explore on earth.
Mm.
New way of looking at it.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, but it gives comfort. Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Julie. It was really heart opening. Yeah, listening to this. And I love the story about the Pope the most. I think that something similar happened
Clement.
to me
Look
when
him up. Clement the Sixth.
I will. Yeah, I heard of him. I do remember him. Yeah, the Pope Clement. I was studying the Akashic Records, and when I first, like 10 years ago, I was doing a meditation to enter the Akashic Records and to meet a guide. And suddenly a guide appears, and he's a monk in a white robe. And I said, "Well, who are you?" He says, "Oh, I'm Bernard of Clairvaux." I said, "Wow, you are like this very posh Christian guy and like a monk, and you advocated for the Second or Third Crusade or something like that, wrote the Constitution of Knights Templar, etc., etc.
Oh,
What
wow.
you're doing in the New Agey Akashic Records?" It's like, "Well, I'm your guide."
Wow. Yeah, he's a big deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Cool.
He was
But
like,
you
"No,
know
this is
what?
serious."
Yeah. And I find, and I'd love to hear what you think of this, Inga. I find that guides show up to us to help us in where we are at a certain stage in our lives. And and your spirit guide and Pope Clement, they've reincarnated a bunch of times, but that spirit frequency stays the same in
Yeah,
all incarnations. And they're going to show up to us in a way that it's going to correlate with what it is we're exploring.
of course.
So if Clement showed up to me in a different way, other than the Pope who was in office during the Black Plague, I would have been like, okay, yeah, whatever. You know, if he showed up like as a, I don't know, a farmer or
Mhm.
or even a doctor saying you need to teach people what happens when somebody dies, it wouldn't have had the same impact as it did and does still with him showing up as the Pope that's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead with relation to what he's asking me to do, which is why I give away tens of thousands of books every year, the audiobook and the digital, because he said you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And that's what I'm doing by giving away tens of thousands of these a year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It has to make sense, right? If I had seen a, I don't know, a tarot reader from next door, I would have said, "Yeah, yeah, got you.
Yeah.
it's all rubbish," and would have forgotten it the next
Or
day.
like
And
a
yeah,
milkmaid or a nurse or something that would not be in sync with what it was you were exploring.
yeah, yeah. It's true. It's all wondrous and magical how it works.
I agree.
Oh, thank you, Julie. So it's really been a pleasure connecting with you. So once again, so people can find you on Julie Ryan, what was it? AskJulieRyan.com.
AskJulieRyan.com. Yeah.
And
AskJulieRyan.com. All the social medias, Ask Julie Ryan. We're on all the podcast networks. That's an Ask Julie Ryan. I have 5 YouTube channels. They're all Ask Julie Ryan. I've got English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and German. And the shows are in those languages. So if your preferred language is one of those, you can watch my shows on YouTube on one of those channels. But everything's at Ask Julie Ryan.
mm, wonderful. So I'll post these links too. And thank you so much for your presence and your beautiful spirit.
Thank you. Sending everybody lots of love. Mwah! From Sweet Home, Alabama, the southeastern part of the U.S.
Yeah, thank you.